Good evening, Mr. Five here, Incarcerated Nation Network. Just want to say this now, our Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin was one of the only people instrumental in actually implementing into the state budget, the city budget, closing Rikers. And I remember just coming home from like another bit at Rikers, from some of my activism, a little 6-month stint, and right that day, had a press conference right in the office with Aisha Sekou, and Lieutenant Brian Benjamin was like one of the only people who's Lieutenant Governor now. But at the time, Senator Benjamin was one of the only legislators willing to say, let's get it into the budget. Let's get that legislation and get it into the budget. All right. I'm bringing you one of our older productions, which is very still quite relevant today. Some of the notions and actions are still happening. Some of those implementations have taken place, but really have been dragged out. But the closing of Rikers is still going to happen in 2026. Killing Rikers is a production I did with Columbia Journalism, DART, and also New York City Lens. Killing Rikers is an exclusive report about Rikers Island in itself, its existence, but a little bit more in-depth details about the island construction. Since its opened in 1932, the main New York City jail, Rikers Island, has become synonymous with abuse and neglect of the incarcerated people there. City leaders have discussed closing this jail complex on and off since the late 1970s, but in the last few years, more so when we was doing this report, the idea has picked up momentum and got a huge boost which was the spring of 2017. The report, called the Lippman Commission, after its ledger judge, Jonathan Lippman, outlines a vision, reduce the number of people incarcerated overall for the raze in the notorious jail. The argument is that Rikers culture is toxic, too toxic to repair. City Lens, New York City Lens, came out and partnered with Incarcerated Nation Network to create a different type of document to sort of educate the world around what killing Rikers would take, but also what is Rikers Island in entirety. And so it's a full page. I invite you to please look at it. Links are going to be below after this video, with 4 full documentaries. Right below that, there's a whole timeline of Rikers Island beginning in 1650. Yes, this was built and the concept was developed back in 1650. This was one, think of Ellis Island, and at the other end we have Rikers Island, right? Both sort of implementing people into the state, but also an incarceration system will travel up into the 62 counties of New York State. Below that is a detailed timeline, but also one of my youth, Junior Rodriguez, was tasked to go out and communicate with everybody in the community district. In New York 15, in the Bronx, it is the highest rate of people in Rikers Island. And so no matter who he talked to, from the homeless guy in the corner, somebody at the community center, the woman that works in the beauty parlor, all of these people have incarceration within their ratio, but also in their personal lives. Junior himself helped produce most of this documentation and segments as he walked with Columbia students throughout his community. New York 15 is not only, in the South Bronx, the poorest district in the United States of America, but is also the most population of people that end up cycling through Rikers Island. No coincidence there. So just bringing back this documentary short, it's really like a few shorts, like a 4-part short series that we produced with Columbia Journalism, because it's still relevant today. The issues, the impact, the abuse. You'll hear from guards who blatantly tell you the truth. That environment is still very much alive and thriving today, even though the population has 1/3 of the population when I was doing this report had been reduced. And so I bring you Killing Rikers, which will be sort of like an informational starting point for our podcast about how Rikers Island is actually being taken down and who's a part of doing that.
As we getting closer to Rikers Island now, I feel my heart starting to beat more, and then get right by the bridge and you see the sign, "Welcome to Rikers Island." And then going across the bridge, I just couldn't believe it.
Okay, a typical day of Rikers Island would consist of you getting up in the morning and just worried about if you're going to make it through the day. You know, between the other inmates and the correction staff, you know, you can get a beat down at any given time.
Being on Rikers Island is like being in a world all of its own. you really have to forget about what's going on in the outside world and concentrate solely what's happening in that world in Rikers.
Fear, anxiety, you name it. There is so many emotions running through your mind that you can't even really nail them down to get an understanding of what's happening.
Some people come in, they become victims, so you always got to be mindful of not being a victim. And so, you know, you're either the predator or you're the prey. And you got to figure out pretty quickly who you are in that place.
That guy's name is Joe. He was taking fingerprints on an inmate. And the inmate took a razor blade and slashed his face. Slashed him all the way down, through his ear, down to here. So when I walked in, I saw the inmate that did it, and he was smiling at everybody. Smiled at me. So I calmed down a little bit. I told all the 7-3 officers with their captain, get out, just leave. Tell me when the ambulance gets here for this guy. Because they had sent two puffy captains to go in there to slap him around a little bit to teach him a lesson. And he's in there laughing. I was boiling. I've never done this before, but I did it that day. I called my 3 baddest guys. It's a white guy, a black guy, and a Spanish guy. They already knew what happened. So I took the keys from everybody. I locked all the doors. And I opened that cell up. I said, hit him anywhere, do whatever you want, don't kill him, and don't hit him in the face. Well, in 2 minutes, they beat him unconscious. They busted him up so bad, I thought he was dead. I said, now drag him out there. He was unconscious. Now I'm getting worried. Usually when you're dragging someone, their head's bouncing, absolutely no signs of life. Ooh, boy, this is scary. So I said, drag him over to the water cooler. So I filled up some water and started pouring on him, and his eyes flooded. I said, get him on the ambulance, get him out of here. And they took him out. It was days before I could get that out of my mind. I thought I set my guys loose in a conspiracy to kill somebody, but I got away with it.
It's a violent place. It really is. Either from the COs or from the inmates. Everybody in there is violent. And if you're trying to stay out of the mix, it's very hard. I've seen how the captain used adolescents for sex. These were 16, 17-year-olds. But I was afraid to say something because of consequences. And then I could see the sadness in the young girl's face. And I was powerless. I couldn't do nothing to change it or fight for her. I mean, I did listen to her, but that's all I can do because I was afraid.
I can't hear keys rattling without being startled because the prison guards walk past your cage, rattle their keys because they know it's going to stay in your mind, in your thought process, in your hearing.
Somebody tried to make me wash their underwear, and I refused. And when I went to bed that night, about 3 of them came over to my bed and they jumped me. They beat me into a bloody pulp, and I had to change to another house.
You have to fight for everything. You have to fight to use the phone. You have to fight to keep your clothes. You have to fight to keep your food. You have to fight to earn your respect.
There was a particular instance where a gentleman came into the house. He had just got into the building, so he was trying to bail out. So he wanted to contact his family. So he went and picked up the phone. As I turned around and blinked, somebody sliced him from one end of his neck all the way around to the other end of his neck because he touched the phone.
Another detainee who was fairly a loner. He was getting assaulted by a few other detainees, and they shoved a deodorant bottle in his anus. And eventually he reported it, and steps was taken to have him removed from the housing unit.
If there was any allegations of sexual incidents in a male facility, it was usually inmate on inmate, and they rarely reported it because they were embarrassed.
When I worked there, I never had a problem with inmates. I had problems with officers. There have been so many lawsuits that New York City taxpayers end up footing the bill for. Inmates have been beaten to death. For how many years are New Yorkers going to put up with this culture of brutality?
Uses of force where my officers were involved. I'm not saying they were all clean. Some guys got carried away. But I had the final say. I always cleared them. Not one of my officers in all my years as a supervisor was found guilty of using excessive force. Necessary force, yes. Excessive, not one of my guys, ever. You get somebody who's screwed up out on the street, now they come into Rikers, they're not going to be nice. It's dog eat dog. You can be nice, you can be polite, but don't turn your back, don't blink, because you could get knifed, punched, stabbed, jumped, kicked, bodily fluids thrown on you. That was kind of becoming a popular method of expressing dislike by the inmates. I was always nice and polite until otherwise. And then I would go to step 2. So if you tell someone to stand there and they don't stand there, your options are very limited.
A red light went off, so when the red light went off, movement stops because that means something happened in the building. And this is probably like the first horrific thing that I saw on Rikers Island. So they make you put your hands behind your neck, lock your elbows, and face the wall. So I hear the gate open, and when the gate opens, you see all of these guys with helmets on, shields, sticks, and they're running down the hallway.
You can either yell at him, and he'll yell back. And most of these guys are gorillas. They can kick the average ass of the average correction officer. So you're up against the wall. What do? Yell at him or let him do what he wants, and everybody else sees that. Now you as an officer are considered to be a weakling. Can't be a weakling in jail.
I just happened to look over my shoulders and peek to see, and the look that I saw on this kid's face was just agonizing pain. His face was covered in blood. You could tell his nose was clearly broken. He had a gash over his nose. It looked like his teeth just got knocked out. He was spitting up blood. From his forehead on down to his shirt was probably the same color as my sweater. And that was the first wicked thing that I saw on Rikers Island, my first day there.
In order to put him in his place, you may have to break a rule. And that rule might be to knock him out. Punch him in the head, kick him in the nuts, throw him to the ground, and let all the other inmates see what you did. Because the next person that steps out of line knows, uh-oh, I'm not going to try him.
But I've seen a person beat to death. I've seen people kill themselves, and guards walk around and say, another dead one, or another body here. I've seen people have seizures and still get tasered by the stun shield and have complications and die. And nobody acts like it's anything different. People just come in, regular shift, go to work, nothing.
You have to let them know that you're not going to take it. And the tough guys are always going to try you. These guys from birth, they're in there to cause trouble. Trouble is what makes them happy.
Their means of unofficially punishing us was to line us outside, have us get on our knees outside like the A and B gate, put our hands behind our head, and literally practice his new karate moves out on us.
And then if an officer had a problem with you, a lot of times he would call in on the radio, and we call it the goon squad. They bring in like 5, 6 officers, and they say, oh, we have to take you to someplace. And instead of taking you, let's say, medical, they take you off site where they beat you up or teach you a lesson. And then they say, if you say anything to the nurse, then we'll beat you up some more, and we'll make up something on our, whatever it is, our report.
Rikers affected my health on many levels, mainly my mental health. It actually got me to believe that I was an animal and this was the only way that I deserved to be treated, and this was the only world where I was allowed to function. And so I began to believe it.
Did I stop seeing them as humans? Yes.
When you lock up a mother, you lock up a family. You lock up a mother and a family, you lock up a community.
It killed my mother. You know, my mother had to go through a lot, you know, to come visit me, what I was saying about Rikers, having, you know, all of my family members, especially the women who had to come and had to be, you know, had to come with children and then have to be searched, have the children searched, have to take off bras, have to, you know, really be dehumanized themselves just so they could see me. Ran through all type of drug tests and all of these unnecessary things just so that they can come and see me for 1 hour, which was 1 hour if they allowed it to be 1 hour.
There's a lot of women that's there that doesn't have the, like, you know, is not fortunate like everyone else that could get commissary, and so they would have to like double down and use their panties like 1 or 2 times, like, you know, over and over. And sometimes the COs in there have their favorites, so they don't always get the opportunity to get as the other ones would. So there's a lot of favoritism going on in there. If you didn't have any visitors or you didn't have any money, you were basically just a number. Like the more popular inmates had more respect from the officers than the ones that didn't have any money.
From what I see, they were put through a lot, and they had to do time with me that they didn't deserve to have to do.
And the officers was very, very rude. They spoke to us like we were not human.
If you had your menstrual cycle, they didn't care. We would sometimes tell the officers, I'm on my menstrual, and she would say, that's not my problem. And then they would have you take out whatever you had, and there were women who would actually bleed onto the floor, and they would just let that happen as if nothing, and the girls who were working custodial had to clean that up at the end of these searches.
A lot of women that's been there a lot of times, the correction officers, they know them. Or it's automatic, they already know them. So it's like they're catered to them.
It was also the constant fear. And you hear these girls fighting all night, girls stealing from each other, and you're just sleeping with one eye open. You don't get that rest.
So if it's an altercation going on inside the dorm, they'll call the boom squad. And when the boom squad come, they don't just come for that particular altercation. They just, whoever's in their way, that's who they attack. They call them like Ninja Turtles because they come fully geared and they have like police sticks. So they just come and, you know, whoever's in the way is getting knocked out the way.
And sometimes you were shackled to people who were so angry that they were pulling you across. They were doing a lot of things that put you in danger. And I became very anxious and fearful since my experience.
When I got to Rikers, they confirmed that I was pregnant. One morning we went to breakfast, and one of the other girls in the mess hall, we were walking out, and she gave me a sandwich because I was like extra hungry and she didn't want it. And one of the officers, female officers, smacked the sandwich off my hand. I threw coffee on her. It was cold by then, but they tackled me down like I was an animal, and like they pressed, like my stomach was pressed on a table with like 3 officers on top of me. And then they put me in solitary confinement for a good 10 hours. I was very stressed out. And after that happened, they put me in protective custody because the officer wanted to, excuse my French, fuck me up.
If I could say one thing about Rikers, it would be for people to stay away. Do the right thing. This is not a place for human beings.
Rikers Island is a blight on New York City because it represents the worst aspects of jail management. For as long as it's existed, the conditions have been brutal. There's a culture of systemic violence. Report after report after report shows this.
So abuse is rampant on Rikers, and when it happens, everybody reacts.
It's so overblown. The people that are complaining about abuses are civilians. They never walked in these shoes. They never put a uniform on. They never had to tell 300 inmates to shut up and walk down a corridor quietly. The systematic abuse is definitely overrated. I wouldn't call it systematic abuse. I would call it systematic instant correction.
Let's say people that have drug offenses or people that have, let's say, jumped a turnstile, but the bail might have been $1,000 and they can't get out, so they're stuck there for years and years and years. So like what happened with the Cleve Brown story when he had a book bag and he was there for 3 years.
Most of the arrests in New York City are for low-level misdemeanors. These arrests, people do not need to be spending, 3 days on Rikers Island. And it will change when it's broken up into smaller jails.
They closed the Queens House of Detention. They demolished the Bronx House of Detention. What are you going to do with the other 9,500? Where are you going to put them?
So in terms of reducing the jail population, I think that is absolutely feasible, because most of the inmates who are there they've been charged but not convicted of a crime. And they're there because they can't afford bail.
I think the plan to close Rikers is a good plan. It eventually came out. I don't agree with all the details of it. I think it can be done in shorter than 10 years. The mechanisms to close Rikers Island are already in place. There's no need to reinvent the wheel.
The biggest problem with the plan of shutting down Rikers is de Blasio. We have a person in office that had 4 years to do right by us, to be our mouthpiece. And in those 4 years, has he done anything?
Given the amount of negative attention and alarm regarding Rikers Island, the conditions, I'm surprised that de Blasio, the mayor, did not act more quickly.
Rikers, the legacy of Rikers will be of one that I hope tells the world what we should never ever do again. Because Rikers is an emblem of a disastrous criminal justice system that literally warehoused people, isolated people, was brutal to people, and never brought justice into the justice system.
I personally hope the future of it is to be burnt up, and that's being honest. I think it should be torn down. I don't think another jail should be built there. They should build a university up there and give it free to everybody that's been experiencing trouble on Rikers Island.
I think the place needs to be bulldozed. It's a cesspit, and it is a blight on our city. And I do think it's possible, and I hope it's closed.
Not going to happen. In my heart of hearts, I do not believe Rikers Island will close in my lifetime or yours.
I have spent over 43,000 hours in solitary confinement.
Far too many people, they're in for far too long, and they're in conditions that are totally inhumane and ineffective.
Nothing good is coming from our way of incarcerating.
There's not a lot of looking at the individual and what does the individual need. The system's not set up for that. The system's set up to control and punish.
The system is torturous, 23 hours in a cell, 365 days a year.
It's a terrible thing that we're doing in New York State right now. It's a terrible thing that we're doing to thousands of people. Every day there are around 4,500 people in New York State who are locked in special housing units.
3 t-shirts, 3 boxes, 3 socks.
They have no meaningful human interaction or programs.
You don't have the opportunity to expand your mind in any state. You're just trapped in a room with only your thoughts.
Any kind of stimulation becomes noxious, difficult to bear.
Causes you to lose memory, have an explosive, impulsive action.
They develop uncontrollable emotions, rage in particular, and people act out.
Sometimes the acting out is the need to have contact with other people, and it's always interpreted by the correction officers as just another misbehavior.
A young man who I worked with a lot while he was in city jail when he went upstate was placed in solitary confinement.
Around New York State there are 39 different facilities that have special housing unit beds.
They're not allowed to make phone calls. They're in the size of a cell that's the size of a small bathroom, and they're just stuck there.
I had known him to have pretty significant and a ranging of mental health symptoms and diagnoses.
People who, maybe have had some mental health issues, if they're placed in those conditions, it just exacerbates it.
He's placed in solitary, even though there was the SHU exclusion bill.
SHU exclusion law signed into law in 2008 and became effective in July 2011, and it requires people with serious mental illness to be taken out of solitary confinement.
I received a letter from him that he had been given additional solitary time because he had hoarded up his pills with the intention of killing himself.
Between 500 and 600 people who are still in solitary confinement right now in New York State prison are on the mental health caseload.
And because those pills were considered contraband, these were pills that the mental health staff were giving him. He was punished for that.
Between 2007 and 2011, New York State issued 75,000 placements that resulted in placing somebody in a special housing unit.
5 out of the 6 sentences that resulted in solitary confinement were for nonviolent conduct.
Leaving the mess hall with a pack of sugar.
Too many stamps. You're allowed 50 stamps. If you have 51 stamps, that can result in solitary.
Having too many pencils in your cell.
So the vast majority of people who are in segregated confinement are not there because they've stabbed somebody.
This is the first rule of disciplinary action in New York State, and it has to stop.
So New York releases a lot of people directly from solitary confinement back to the community, and it doesn't provide treatment, counseling, assistance for people who are making that really difficult transition.
They may be coming back to a world that's significantly changed.
To then go directly from that box, potentially for the last several years, to going to the middle of New York City with no added support or additional mental health services or programs given to you, it can be devastating.
Many treatment providers have no experience dealing with the trauma of being incarcerated and then the trauma of being in the box.
CIC is a campaign for alternatives to isolated confinement, in which we have an accumulation of organizations, nonprofits, grassroots organizations working together to end solitary confinement?
We are organizing, we're trying to meet as many people who care about this issue already. We're trying to convince new people to care about the issue.
By changing the laws and by changing these rules and by changing the structure, we're actually trying to change solitary confinement.
Our goal is to drastically reduce the number of people who are in segregated confinement.
Vulnerable people should not be placed into solitary confinement. Pregnant women.
Young people, people with mental health needs.
By us changing the rules, we will change the way solitary confinement is considered torturous.
We need to drastically reduce the length of time.
To increase transparency over the system.
To fundamentally change how we respond to things that happen inside of prisons and in our communities.
No human being should be placed in those conditions for an extended period of time.
We need to build a mass movement to end the torture that is solitary confinement and to challenge mass incarceration.
If you're arrested in New York City and you can't afford bail, you will probably end up on Rikers Island, the largest jail complex in the United States. Isolated from the rest of the city and built on a landfill, the 9 jails on Rikers are falling apart and notorious for violence. Conditions are so bad that in 2014, federal prosecutors found them unconstitutional. Because Rikers is so remote, jail buses must transport 900 people to and from courts each day at a cost of $42 million a year. Family members lose connections with loved ones because visiting someone for just 1 hour can take all day. Lawyers too rarely visit their clients to plan their defense. Rikers is not only a broken jail complex, it is a symbol of deeper problems in our criminal system. 90% of people in jail are Black or Latinx, and almost half have a mental health diagnosis. Presumed innocent until proven guilty, the vast majority are awaiting trial. Only a small percentage are eventually sentenced to upstate prison. 75% of the people sent to Rikers are released straight back to our communities, worse off than when they went in. The human costs are massive. Even a short stay in jail can cause someone to lose their job, their housing, or custody of their children. The financial costs are also massive. These dysfunctional jails cost over $2 billion each year, $302,000 per bed. Protests led by people who had been incarcerated began to call for closing Rikers. Starting in 2016, an independent commission chaired by the former Chief Judge of New York State conducted a year-long investigation, talking to law enforcement, community members, and formerly incarcerated people. The commission laid out a comprehensive plan for a more just New York City. Our unanimous recommendation was that the city and state should make deep changes to the justice system to cut the number of people in jail by at least half, improve public safety, and close the Rikers jails. Changes like diverting people with mental illness and substance abuse issues out of the system, getting rid of cash bail because no one should be locked up because they can't afford to buy their freedom, stopping endless delays in bringing cases to trial, and reforming parole so people no longer go back to jail for low-level violations like missing curfew. These and other changes would make jail the last resort and safely cut the number of people in jail by thousands. With fewer people in jail, New York City can close the 9 jails on Rikers forever and shift to a much smaller system of facilities near each borough courthouse. These facilities would provide better access for family and lawyers and be safer for correction officers and the people in jail, designed with space for education and job training so people have a better chance to succeed when they leave. This smaller system would save $500 million per year in operating costs, money that should be invested in low-income communities most impacted by the criminal system. As the commission released its report, the city announced it would close Rikers. Change is happening already. Now there are almost 2,000 fewer people in jail than 2 years ago, and the city is as safe as it's ever been. To finish the job, we need more changes at every level of government, including the courts and district attorneys. And the City Council must approve a much smaller system of jails closer to courthouses. Together, we can put an end to the cruelties of Rikers and make a more just city for everyone.